Hey ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 5, Notes 4. So we're going to go through the different ways that we learned for solving quadratics, because there's actually multiple different ways. Some always work and some only sometimes work. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. So let's take a look at our methods for solving quadratics. First of all, you need to know that there are 3 methods. Okay, so the first method is graphing to find the x-intercepts. So that's what we're doing when we are solving quadratics. We're really trying to find the x-intercepts of a parabola. So remember when we did that, we had a parabola and it kind of looked like this, and then we'd see where it crossed the x-axis, okay? And that's one way of doing it, but remember that graphing isn't always very accurate. The next way we did it was using the zero product property. That's where we use what we call the x method, where you put a times c up top, and then b in the bottom, and then you need to find your 2 factors. So we're going to be doing a little bit of reviewing of that factoring step today. And the other way we learned was that quadratic formula. I do suggest having that quadratic formula written down on your sheet so that you have it for down the road. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We're going to do the algebraic method. Algebraic methods are the most exact. So we're going to solve this using the zero product property. So what does that mean? Well, that means we need to factor. So remember, to factor, we need to take 1 times 20, and that's going to give us 20. So we're multiplying to 20 and adding to 9. Well, what multiplies to 20 and adds to 9? That's going to be 5 and 4. So if you for some reason don't remember factoring, I did put all of the videos on Schoology, so you can always take a look back at an old unit if you need to. All right, next, let's take a look at this next one. So now what we want to do is we want to factor by grouping. So I'm going to keep the first term the same. Then I'm going to split that middle term up. And instead of having 9x, I'm going to write that as 5x plus 4x. I'm taking that out. Plus 20 is equal to 0. And now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So make my 2 groups. Okay, between x squared and x to the 5th, I can take out an x. So really what I'm doing is I'm dividing each of those terms by x, and then I'm left with x plus 5. Out of the second group, I can take out a 4, and when I divide each of those terms by 4, I'm left with x plus 5. And that's equal to 0. So I notice now that my leftovers are matching, so I'm going to go ahead and factor those out. And once I've factored those out, I'm going to take what's left over once I've gotten rid of those. So my 2 factors are x plus 5 and x plus 4. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to set each of those factors equal to 0. So x plus 5 is equal to 0, and x plus 4 is equal to 0. So now these are just simple equations that I need to solve. So then I end up getting x is equal to negative 5 and x is equal to negative 4. So that's if we were to use the zero product property. Let's take a look at solving using the quadratic formula now. So when we use the quadratic formula, I need to assign my a, my b, and my c. My a is equal to 1, my b is equal to 9, and my c is equal to 20. So let's go ahead and let's solve that out. So I get x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that over 2 times a. Now we have to go through and we have to simplify this out a little bit. So when we simplify it out, what I want to do is type just what's in the radical. I'm not going to type the radical itself. I'm just typing what's underneath it. So in my calculator, I'm doing 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 20. When you do that, you end up getting 1. Divided by 2. So I have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 1. Well, the square root of 1 is just 1. So then I end up getting negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. Now here's where I want to split it into my 2 different versions. So I'm going to do negative 9 plus 1 divided by 2. Well, negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. Divided by 2 is negative 4. Well, good, that matches our first answer. And negative 9 minus 1 divided by 2, that's negative 10 divided by 2, which is negative 5. So if you look, our answers for number 1 are the same using both methods. And that's what we're trying to show, is that you can use either method. Some methods are easier for students than others. Also, take a look at the x-intercept. So this is the graphed parabola of this. If you notice, it's crossing at 4, -4, and -5. So really that's what all of this information is telling us are those x-intercepts. So let's take a look at this next one again. So let's go ahead and let's set up our x. So here we're multiplying to -24 and adding to 10. Well, to do that we need to do 12 and -2. Remember, when you have a negative product, you need to have a positive and a negative factor. So now I'm going to split up that middle term. And instead of having 10x, I'm going to write it as 12x minus 2x, which is really the same thing. And then I'm going to factor by grouping. So between x squared and 12x, I can take out an x, and then I'm left with x plus 12. Then, out of the second group, I need to take out a negative GCF because the sign between the two is negative. So I'm going to take out a -2, and then I'm left with x plus 12. So then I get that x plus 12 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. So now is where that zero product property comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set each of those factors equal to 0. So then I get that x is equal to a -12 when I subtract from both sides, and x is equal to a +2 when I add to both sides. So that's our answer using the zero product property. Let's take a look at what would happen if we use the quadratic formula. So let's go ahead and find our a, our b, and our c. Our a is 1. Our b is 10. Our c is -24. So let's go ahead and put that into the quadratic formula. So x is equal to opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, hopefully I can fit that -24 in there, all over 2 times a. Again, the first thing I want to do is simplify underneath that radical. So in my calculator, I do 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times -24. So now I have -10 plus or minus the square root. Now we're going to get the square root of 196. All of that is going to be divided by 2. So now I need to go ahead and take the square root of 196, which is going to give me 14. And that's going to be divided by 2. So now I can take and I can split up and make my two different versions. So I'm going to do -10 plus 14 divided by 2. So that's going to give me 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So that's one of my solutions. Then I'm going to do -10 minus 14 divided by 2. That's going to give me -24. Divide that by 2, and I get -12. So again, my two solutions, 2 and -12, match the same solutions as when I did the zero product property. Next, let's take a look at that graph. You'll notice that it's crossing the x-axis at 2 here, and it's crossing at -12 here. So that you could graph it to find it, but again, graphing isn't always the most accurate. Algebra always is. So now we're going to solve this next one using the zero product property. So let's go ahead and set up our x. So we have 2 times -4. So we're multiplying to a -8 and adding to a 3. So we know we need a positive and a negative product. Is it ever going to multiply to a -8 and add to 3? Well, I can't think of anything. So this is not factorable. So here the zero product property does not work. But guess what? It's still possible that the quadratic formula could. So let's take a look. So here our a is equal to 2, our b is equal to 3, and our c is equal to -4. So let's go ahead and let's plug that into the quadratic formula. So x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that over 2 times a. So we have -3 plus or minus the square root. This is the part we're going to simplify first. So in my calculator, I'm typing 3 squared. Always make sure you use those parentheses. That really helps if you keep those parentheses in there when you're typing it in. So you get 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times -4. Well, then you end up getting -3 plus or minus the square root of 41. Well, 41 is not a nice, or the square root of 41 is not a nice number, which is why the zero product property didn't work, because it's not a nice number. So here's how I'm going to solve that out. In my calculator, I'm going to type -3 plus the square root of 41, and then I'm going to hit enter and get that answer. I'm going to take that answer and divide it by 4, and when I do that, I get 0.85. Then I'm going to take -3, and now I'm going to do my minus version, minus the square root of 41. I'm going to type that all in my calculator and hit enter, and then I'm going to take that answer and divide it by 4. And when I do that, I get a -2.35. Remember to watch your rounding. I usually say to round to 2 decimal points. So if the third number is 5 or greater, you need to round the second number up. If it's 4 or below, you're going to keep that second number the same. So let's talk about this. First of all, let's take a look at the graphs. So you'll notice that it's crossing between two parts, okay? That's why zero product property didn't work, because our answer is not a rational number. It's not a nice number. It's not a pretty number. So when doesn't factoring work? Factoring doesn't work when you can't do the x. So if you can't do the x, your next thing to do is to try the quadratic formula. So it means that either you're going to have an icky decimal, meaning it's not a rational number, or there could be no solution altogether, meaning the parabola doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So if the x can't be made, immediately I want you to try the quadratic formula. If you end up getting a square root underneath the radical, like maybe something like this, then that would mean that there's no solution. So that means that neither method works. But if you get an okay number under the radical, like we did on the previous problem, that means that your answer is going to be irrational, but you can still solve to get that decimal. Okay, let's take a look at, last but not least, at this word problem. So the physics department is having a pumpkin flinging contest out on the football field for Halloween, and so we want to figure out when it's going to hit the ground. Well, when we hit the ground, our height is 0. So I get negative 16t squared plus 72t. So this is one that I want to try to factor, and I'm going to try by pulling out the greatest common factor, because I notice each one has a t. So I'm asking myself, okay, what divides 16 and 72? Well, that's going to be 8, so I'm actually going to just take out a negative. Then I see that I have a t squared here and I have a t here. So then out of each term I can take out a t. So really what I'm doing is I'm dividing each of these by negative 8t. So then when I do that, I end up getting 2t here, and then minus 9 here. Now recall that that's set equal to 0. So even though I didn't use the x, this is still a problem that I can use the zero product property. So I'm going to take negative 8t and set it equal to 0, and 2t minus 9 and set it equal to 0. So here I'm going to divide both sides by negative 8, and I end up getting that t is equal to 0. Well, to me that answer doesn't really make sense, because it doesn't matter that it's not going to come back to the ground after 0 seconds. We want some time to elapse. So let's solve this next one for t. So we're going to add 9 to both sides, and we get 2t is equal to 9. Divide both sides by 2, and you get that t is equal to 4.5. Now that makes a lot more sense. So let's go back up to our original word problem, where we want to figure out after how many seconds it's going to hit the ground. So then our t is 4.5 seconds. Okay, so that concludes your note video today. Make sure you take your Schoology quiz. Thanks for listening.